and see what this actually has here. Eli. Priest at Shiloh. So this doesn't actually give. And this is interesting. I knew there was more to it. So Eli, here we have, actually comes from Allah. To go up, ascend, or climb. It can have kind of all of these meanings: restored, brought, burned, charging, vanish, withdraw. Anyway, we were talking about doing this video a month ago. So if I don't seem very organized with it, that is part of it. So this is what I was sharing with them, is the word Eli actually comes in the Hebrew from the word Allah, which means to go up, ascend, and climb.
Okay, so again, with the kind of high.
Yeah, exalted. Yeah, so much here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of meaning in that.
Again, kind of going toward that above, the one who lives above versus below.
Yeah, Father above, dwelling, sitting, or dwelling above. Yeah. So
and Father above, like, kind of makes me harken back to the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray.
Yes.
The Lord's Prayer.
Yeah. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Yes, definitely. Exactly. Yeah, this is just fascinating. It really is. And then you had this one. They've got a nice website. They really do. It doesn't have a lot of pop-ups and stuff. I pulled up some other information, but it'll be in the notes because I didn't want to deal with all of the pop-ups on some of the other stuff. But the Chickasaw were respected and honored as keepers of the flame. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's see. Oral tradition tells us the earth began when crawfish dove into the watery depths of the world and built the first landmass from mud at the bottom of the ocean. From these early beginnings, all things good sprang to life, including the Chickasaw. It also speaks of our migration from the place in the west to our promised homeland in what are now the states of Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, and parts of Kentucky. Anyway, very, very interesting. And Teata, was she actually a Chickasaw? I can't remember. But this is her telling telling a Chickasaw story. She told stories of all from a lot of tribes. But yeah, very, very interesting. And then let's see, I had the Choctaw legend states in 1855, Choctaw warriors encountered a group of enormous hairy creatures resembling what we now know as Bigfoot. These creatures were said to be very large, standing around 7 to 8 feet tall, with muscular build covered in dark hair and possessing incredible strength. They lived deep in the forests of what is now Oklahoma, where the Choctaw had settled after their forced removal from their original homeland. Let's see. So that was an interesting. Let's see. A Choctaw leader, either a chief or a respected warrior, gathered a group of his tribe's best fighters to track down these creatures and put an end to their terror. These warriors were skilled in combat, known for their bravery and ability to navigate the forests and mountains. Armed with spears, bows, and arrows, they set off into the woods to confront the creatures. They eventually tracked down the creatures in their hiding place deep in the wilderness. The resulting confrontation was described as a fierce battle with both sides fighting furiously. And the Sasquatch creatures, due to their size and strength, were a formidable enemy, but the Choctaw warriors managed to prevail. And legend claims that a few of the creatures escaped into the wild, never to be seen again. After that, the attacks on the villages ceased from them. So anyway, that was an interesting story. Let's see. Did we go over the Cheyenne creation story? I don't think we did.
I don't know that we did.
I've got a couple of versions here. Let's see. The creation story of the Cheyenne tells of a being who was floating on the surface of the water. Water birds, swans, geese, ducks, and other birds that swam already existed, and these were all about him. The person called these birds and asked them to bring him some earth, and they were glad to do so and agreed one after another to dive down through the water and see if they could find earth at the bottom. The larger birds dived in vain. They came up without anything, for they could not reach the bottom. But at last, one small duck came to the surface with a little mud in his bill.
It's interesting. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. How a lot of the storytellers begin the story is very interesting. In the beginning, there was nothing, and Maheo, the All Spirit, lived in the void.
And which one is that?
The Cheyenne creation.
The Cheyenne. Okay.
That is how they begin their creation myth. In the beginning, there was nothing, and Maheo, the All Spirit, lived in the void.
Yeah. And then this one is talking about water,
Mm-hmm.
And it tells of a being who was floating on the surface of the water. And of course, in Genesis, it says that God moved on the face of the water, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then, okay. So I almost ought to just read this, but I'm trying to save some for time. So basically, they go into a lot of the Native Americans, so a lot of their stories, they tend to personalize these deities a lot more than how we see it in the Bible. The Bible is presenting like factual, here is how it went. And then also, because we don't read Hebrew, we don't get the depth of the Hebraic language, what it brings. So we can't fully understand, but their oral traditions give their spirits and stuff way more personality and stuff. So basically, their story goes, in the beginning there was nothing, and Maheo, the All Spirit, lived in the void. That, and then they explain, like, basically, so that everyone can understand, there was nothing to see, there was nothing to listen. He looked around to him, there was nothing to see. He listened, but there was nothing to hear. It was just him alone and nothingness. Now, he wasn't lonesome because of his great power. He was a being. Being was a universe, whatever that means. But as he moved through the endless time of nothingness, it seemed to Maheo that his power should be put to use. And so, he thinks, I'm going to do something. It goes into the light. Light began to grow and spread, first white and bleached to the east, then the golden and strawn, until it filled the middle of the sky and extended all around the horizon. And then he even has, like, rather than, he saw that it was good, Mahio thinks to himself how beautiful it all is.
And do you have the link to that? Can you share that in the chat with
Yes,
me
I
so
am
I can get it in the
pulling.
notes?
Let me see.
If it's not a glitchy website, see if you can present it.
Yeah, I actually have a PDF.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yes,
if you can get me a link to the PDF.
I will drop that. There we go.
All
So
right.
yeah, it creates water, and decides everything should come from the water. He creates light and animals, and he's constantly thinking to himself how beautiful. And it just goes into like a lot more depth. And I think where a lot of Christians tend to get tripped up is that in the Native American beliefs have that, earth, they all consider earth a living being and a mother. So I don't think you should worship Mother Earth, but I think even the Bible regards the earth as a living being. So, I think a lot of Christians get tripped up and be like, that's nothing like the Bible, but it's like, it was oral storytelling tradition. You got to keep the kids' attention. They aren't going to listen to King James English.
Right.
You tell them a story.
Well, and that's what they did with the Bible before we had, it in bound volumes. They, during the feasts, twice, 2, 3 times a year, they went and they listened to it being read. And, the Hebrew is very poetic. So if we were listening in Hebrew, and Hebrew was our original language, it would be a very poetic and entertaining,
Yeah, it's got
story.
a lot of depth.
Yeah, it sounds dry sometimes. I don't think it sounds dry at all, but it can sound dry to us because we've got, translation of translation going on here. And we lose.
And we go
English
on
just
autopilot.
doesn't catch. English just doesn't catch it,
Well, and English can catch a lot. You have to be willing to dig deeper because we're not a multi-dimensional language like Hebrew is.
Right.
We have to dig deeper. We have to tell more of the story, much like the Native Americans would. And so you can't just read necessarily one passage and understand fully what's going on. The Bible, even in the English language, constantly explains itself, expounds on itself, and it explains everything to you. You have to read it, though. You have to stay invested in it. So it's not boring at all, and it's not bland at all. You just have to invest the time. And I think that is, as much as people like to, well, I want to go back to the Hebrew roots because there's so much depth there. The Hebrews were able to very quickly, they knew their language, they could understand it, they could read it, they would move into autopilot too. It's the same human problem. English kind of forces you to kind of get off of that autopilot, and you have to go study it.
Right. Right. Yeah. The Lord, there's people that kind of get frustrated about the Bible's been changed and blah, 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 blah. And okay, whatever happened in the 16, 17, 1800s and whoever was translating it, whatever their political views were, blah, blah, blah. Whenever the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in the early 1900s, it proved that even with those translation issues, the Bible was preserved for the most part. And if you read it, the whole thing, and you use scripture to interpret scripture. So whenever you run into something that seems like it's a problem, and you go back through scripture and say, okay, what's the precedent? What's going on here and stuff? And then it will tell you when there's an error in translation. It will tell you. Matthew chapter 1 is an excellent example because God knew this was going to happen. And he said 14 generations, 14 generations, and 14 generations. And if you add it up, you know that that is Mary's father, not Mary's husband. It makes it very simple, very laid out, you know, so and it's one word. So you don't need to throw out the whole Bible. But at the same time, don't ignore those things when people have questions and when people say, well, you know, this is a contradiction. If you don't understand what it is, you know, they're talking about, don't just blow it off and say, no, the Bible doesn't contradict itself, blah, blah, blah. You know, actually look into it and see what the seeming contradiction is.
Yeah.
You know, the same way with Solomon's temple and the pillars in Solomon's temple. In a couple of different places, it gives you different measurements for those pillars. But if you go back and you look at who it was that helped build that, he was a master of levers, and those columns were built as levers. And there's a whole story there that makes it even more interesting whenever you dig into it. And if you're just a King James only, and that is the, you know, Jesus Christ spoke King James English, then you're going to miss so much that way. And you're not going to be a testimony to very many people.
God has complete control over his word, over his letter to us. And he has allowed it to go through so many translations for a reason. Not to say,
and part of that,
I'm going to try and mess things up, but as God has repeatedly stated through his word, his ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not.
Could he not have left some of that in there because he wanted us to dig deeper? Because he wanted us to notice an issue and dig deeper. You
just
know,
like,
and
so go back to the Pharisees and Sadducees in the time of Jesus. Those people knew their Torah front, back, upside down, upside right, left, right.
And they were still condemned. They were still condemned by Yeshua when he came.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they knew their Torah, and yet they thought they knew everything. And they had their mind stuck on how things should be. And he was the bad guy for not following their plan.
Right.
And doing things their way.
And we need to be careful of that. And that's why looking at some of these Native American stories and seeing the similarities and questioning who were they and where did they actually come from is a good idea. You know, and going to the Apocrypha and the book of Enoch and stuff, you know, no, it's not gospel, and no, you don't need it to be saved. But at the same time, if you want to understand the world around you, and if you want to understand the Bible at a deeper level, then some of this extra stuff can help put context and just fill out the story for you.
Yeah, this extra stuff is not to be taken as gospel, but it can help you understand humanity, understand Earth's story, and understand at a deeper level how God works.
Right.
It's one of those things, like, you know, in Romans, whenever, I think it was Romans, where Paul talks about that everything bears witness to God. And if people all around the world have but to look at creation and know that God is there. And you never, growing up in the church, like, I never really thought about that or really understood. And it was one of those things, you know, well, how would the tribes in the Amazon know? You know, and it's like, well, they have creation. But then you go and start doing this, you start researching ancient cultures, myths, and legends, their origin stories, their creation stories, and you start realizing, oh my gosh, humanity isn't a bunch of stupid idiots. They've known all along.